and welcome to the very first episode of Into the Masterverse with yours truly, Brick Something, and
Cobweb.
what's up, Cobb? We're doing this, man. We're finally doing this. It was an idea that's been out there for a little bit, and we're finally committing to just recording it, trying to get it edited. Hope folks enjoy the decor, because this is a whole new show, and this is the very first episode, cutely dubbed Intro the Masterverse. And so this is going to be a collaboration between the two of us, and we are going to be delving deep into one of our favorite toy lines to collect, Masters of the Universe, Masterverse. The general plan here is to go through each and every Masterverse release in release order. Is that right?
I think we're going to do a little hopping around. What we're going to be doing is going over every figure in the Masterverse line, and I'm really excited about this. We're going to have a very long series. It's going to continue here for a good while because we have plenty of figures out now. Be able to go figure by figure throughout the whole line, start checking them out, getting a real deep dive into the whole line.
So we got to talking, and obviously there's a crap ton of YouTube videos out there about MOTU vintage. There's a ton of content out there too about the Masters of the Universe classics that really goes figure by figure, giving us all the information about that line. Origins, yeah, there seems to be that as well. But what we noticed is that, for some reason, Masterverse doesn't seem to get the same amount of love in terms of content on YouTube. And, we'll talk more about that too as we kind of go back in the next episode and talk about the history of the line. It seems like even from the beginning, there was a little bit of I don't know, maybe fan hum and ha of people not quite sure how to accept Masterverse. So I don't know. We just figured, hey, there's a need, man. We both love this line, and we want to make sure that folks can get plenty of content about it and really give us the opportunity to talk about this thing that we love, figure by figure, release by release. So, yep, this show, we're headed deep into the Masterverse because we're kind of into the Masterverse.
What our plan is, we're going to be doing a little bit of bouncing back and forth between the two of our channels. We'll kind of rotate, alternate back and forth. We'll put out a figure, go over the whole figure on one channel first, probably start with Brick here. Next time we'll be hopping over to mine. We'll have a link to this where you'll be able to go to a playlist once we get going and get a few episodes out there. Just click on the playlist and you'll be able to see all the videos in order, depending on what channel it's on. Yeah, we'll have a link down here in the bottom, also in the description here. I believe both of us will be putting out a community post, so you'll be able to find it very easily.
That link is bit.ly/into the Masterverse. And it'll have all the videos, like he said, regardless of if it's on my channel or his channel. So yeah, super easy to follow. But you know what? You should consider also subscribing to both our channels. Hint, hint, wink, wink. So today's episode, again, is titled Intro the Masterverse. We're both explaining what the show is about, but also you all should know about who we are as MOTU collectors and who we are as Masterverse collectors specifically. So let's start there, Cobb. What's your background with Masters of the Universe as sort of a brand and an IP?
Well, for me, it just dates back to the year I was born. I was born in 1982, so grew up the same age as he-Man. And by the time I believe it was 4 years old, I was just watching Masters of the Universe, Filmation cartoon, and Syndicate on television. It was just something I watched every day. I don't think I started preschool yet, but I started collecting my He-Man toys, and a lot of the figures out then were already been out for a little bit, so I was getting a lot of them from flea markets and Goodwill and stuff. But I had my whole collection, Castle Grayskull, so many of the figures I remember having.
So curious about the figures that you were collecting. Do you kind of remember what were the current figures by the time you started buying?
I was young enough that I don't quite remember ever even getting anything in package. I remember the packaging because I still remember those red exploding rocks and the mini comics. I think I was too young to be reading them. I fairly kind of remember I probably had some, but it wasn't something I read. I was more cartoon based, and then later on in life got into the comics.
Nice.
But yeah,
Yeah, for me, so I am a little older, I'm about 6 years older. And so I hit that sweet spot, right? In 82, when this thing dropped, I was 6 years old. And I also have an older brother who's 5 years older than me. And so it started with him, as most of our like toy collecting stuff did. He brought home a vintage He-Man after hanging out with my aunt, because we were like Star Wars and by that time G.I. Joe collectors. Like that was what my parents like understood. Like this is what you guys get, but they were kind of strict about like that means you're not getting anything else. So my brother came home one day with that after hanging out with my aunt because he somehow convinced her to buy him one while they were out. And so this big buff barbarian dude with an axe, because that's what I remember. Like the sword was okay to me. I remember as a kid like thinking, oh, that sword's a little weird looking, right? Especially because it was split in half.
Yeah.
And it was just in a different shape, right? But that axe, I was like all about it. He had the axe and the shield, and I was like, man, that's cool. And super like jelly, and I'm like, yeah, man, I want that. So then at a certain point, I went out with the same aunt to hang out, and it's like, hey, you got him that. I want one. So I ended up getting Skeletor. Since then, like it was all about the action figures. The cartoon didn't come out till later. Filmation didn't come out till later. So I was all about that mini comic, and just the story that it laid down really kind of laid a little bit more of a kind of a basic, like he's a barbarian who gets armor, and there was no like secret identity Prince Adam thing yet, right? That was just completely different. So it was just, to me, oh yeah, the barbarian guy fighting this skeleton-headed guy, and they're fighting over this castle, and so that's kind of how I got into it. And then when the cartoon came out, honestly, I remember even as a kid being a little disappointed because while the art was cool, Filmation cartoons were cool, it was just so much more simplified. I remember even as a kid feeling like it felt like it skewed younger than even G.I. Joe, which even I felt was like, oh, similar. Like my brother and I had the comics, and so that the G.I. Joe cartoon felt younger. So at the end of the day, I was fine with it because I had my toys, and that's how I played. And we ended up getting a couple along the way. I remember for one of my birthdays, it was early on in the wave, I got a Castle Grayskull, and I got, I think, Trapjaw. I think all in all, I maybe had 3 or 4 figures. Beastman, wow. Personally, Skeletor, Beastman, Trapjaw, and I actually think that's it. And then my brother had He-Man. Yeah, we didn't have much. My cousin, who's 5 years younger than me, his mom was the aunt who got us this stuff, right? She was like, this is the line that he's collecting. So it was like G.I. Joe, Star Wars between my brother and I, and then he was the kid with the He-Man. He had a crap ton of He-Man. Yeah. Anyway, that's our relationship to the vintage. I'm just curious, like, so that was vintage. We're talking like the 80s. But then He-Man went away and then came back as New Adventures, and then he went away again and eventually came back in 2000X, right? And then classics. So between the vintage and Masterverse, there was a whole lot of Masters Universe in between. What did you kind of like participate in?
Nothing really at all. That's a big gap for me from like 2000X to classics. Classics is something I missed out on completely. I was kind of busy at the time having kids and doing the whole adulting. I fell out of collecting toys altogether. My last thing I collected was like when I was 17, 18 was when I stopped collecting Star Wars. I was collecting Star Wars figures a lot and gave those all off to my nephew, and I didn't have any action figures or anything at all until 2020 when He-Man finally started coming back around again for this last time.
And when that I'm assuming it started with Origins first, right? And then Masterverse?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. That's funny. I'm the exact same way. So hopefully we don't lose people who are like, fake fans. But no, I mean, I paid attention to it all, especially like I was so excited when that Mike Young Productions cartoon came out. And man, I hunted. Like I remember at a certain point, because we didn't have cable where I was living, I was like going over to folks' houses to try and like catch the show.
Once I like the 2020 and started getting back into He-Man and everything, man, I went back and watched all those, and rewatched them, and man, my love for He-Man has just never gone away. But I always tell everybody that was my first love. The first thing I remember as a child. I don't remember any other toys except for my He-Mans and playing with them. And that's why it was something for me to actually jump back into once like Origins hit, and I seen them on shelves, and I was like, oh, He-Man. If I'm gonna start collecting again, that's what I'm collecting. It was the first toys I ever had, and something I want to get back into again. And Origins led up to this Masterverse. We'll get more into that as well. But
nice.
Yeah, the love for He-Man never went nowhere.
That's cool, because it's like we're grown now and we're in different places in our lives where we do have the opportunity, unlike as kids, to pay for this stuff and go out of our way to like hunt this stuff down and be involved and choose. And so it's funny, you said, I consciously said I'm going to get back into Masters of the Universe because that's what I had as a kid. For me, it was when I heard that Masters of the Universe was coming back first with Origins, and then pretty quickly they talked about, Masterverse, and then they talked about 2 new cartoons. I was just like, oh, this is great. Like, what is this stuff going to look like in 2020? What was it, 2021? So yeah, like right around that time, I was excited, and I was starting to buy toys again and wanted to buy toys, but then it was like, I didn't have like a line that I was committed to. There were some things that I was like, I'm interested in that and interested in that, but and so I think I dabbled with like one G.I. Joe Classified. I was like, oh, that's cool. But then once I heard that specifically Masterverse was coming out, I was like, dude, I want that line. But by that time, only Origins was out. So I was like, oh, maybe I'll just check that out, because I'd come to understand that they were going to be sort of compatible in some ways. And so I was like, okay, well, let me just check out this Skeletor Origins. And then it was like, oh, I need a He-Man. Oh, I need a Battle Cat. It kind of went that way.
Yeah.
But so I have a couple of Origins, but then I was like, I knew I was just waiting, man. I was waiting for Masterverse to drop, and then it did, and I was excited. In the meantime, I had at that time was like, man, I missed out on classics. And I was like paying attention to as much as I could between, local comic book shops and like folks, that I knew that were into collecting and toys were totally into it. And I was like, man, I'm just going to check that out from afar. I'd been to a SDCC, I think it was 2008, when I remember like seeing this giant case of a bunch of different classics figures, all the classics figures that, there weren't that many at that time, but there were quite a few in these cases. And I was like, man, those are amazing. But I couldn't at that time like commit to buying stuff, but I was just watching it from afar. And of course there's the internet, and that right around that time, I started like lurking over on He-Man.org, and just look at everybody else, all the He-Man fans just like reminiscing about the stuff. But again, just wasn't in a position to say I'm gonna drop whatever $20-30 a figure, right? I just whatever it was at that time, it's not something I could do. So anyways, that brings us, I guess, to Masterverse. When they announced that they're going to be doing Origins, and then eventually they announced, so there's a new adult collector line coming called Masterverse. Man, I was just like, that set my brain on fire, especially the name, right? We're using it in our show, Into the Masterverse. Yeah. But that's the idea. It's like, we just kind of talked about how we love a bunch of different types of MOTU. And the idea and the way they pitched it at that first PowerCon, that like, it's going to be a Masterverse because we're going to be pulling from across the history of this brand. And then they quickly announced, there were obviously the 2 shows. There was going to be the CGI show and Revelation. And then so they announced that, the first line is going to be based on the Revelation figures. And then pretty quickly they followed up with, and we're going to be doing Princess of Power and New Eternia. And when they described New Eternia, it was pretty clear that they were going to be committing to making Masters of the Universe like a real thing again in the 2020s. So I was like, yep, Masterverse is it. Like, this is going to give me what I want. This is going to give me access to hopefully the same kind of level of design and hopefully better articulation than what they'd achieved with MOTU Classics. And this is going to try and go head to head with some of the modern lines like G.I. Joe Classified, like Black Series, and just do it for Masters of the Universe.
And it wasn't until those announcements that they were going to be doing those other lines that I kind of knew, oh, we're actually going to get deeper in some figures. Because I was kind of the opposite with you. Wasn't quite jumping into Masterverse. Like the Origins came out, and that was that nostalgia right there for the vintage figures. So I was all in on Origins. I mean, I started out just watching, I think YouTube's what brought me back to He-Man. Watching YouTube,
of course,
seeing new He-Man was going to come out, seeing the new shows and stuff. And that's how I first learned about the Origins. So I was out hunting for them, and pretty much it picked up all the Origins I wanted, and then saw Masterverse was on the shelves. And I was like, you know what? I'll get some of these as well. And slowly, as the line continued, started picking up more and more of them. I was like, you know what? I'm just going to be all in on these. And so Masterverse really took off for me after that.
Love it. And so at this point, you are actually close to complete, definitely more complete than me. How many, it's easier to say how many you think you don't have of all the figures that they've released. Oh, really? You're complete?
Yes, I have everything from the exclusives to everything. I missed out on like the first two San Diego Comic-Con things for Origins, so there's just 3 figures that I don't have there. But Masterverse, from day one when I started collecting them, I made sure to grab everything from every Mattel Creations to the PowerCon to San Diego Comic-Con, all the exclusives, everything. So
nice.
It's been 100% on them so far.
There you go, folks. Just wanted to give you a sense of who's going to be hosting this Into the Masterverse show today as we're sort of doing our intros. Just to give you a sense of our background, kind of how we're approaching both Masters of the Universe as well as Masterverse. We'll get a little bit more into kind of like our habits in terms of both Masterverse and other lines. So like while we're there, before we start to wrap up, let's give folks a sense of like what else we're collecting and how collecting Masterverse sort of fits in with whatever other toys we're getting right now.
For me, pretty much everything that I'm collecting right now is Masters of the Universe. I mean, that's my first lines, no matter what. But outside of that, I'm really into like the sword and sorcery and fantasy type stuff. And I have gotten into, since then, with a little help from our community, our little group of friends, Mythic Legions. Got me a nice little shelf of them going, and some of those are the MOTU tribute figures, the homage figures to them. But then I do have like my other shelf up here, which is just a mix of just all, like I said, swords and sorcery stuff, from everything like Barbarian, Batman, to The Witcher, to just random figures that fit in with that, ogres or trolls or Frost Kings from DC, just anything that kind of fits in up there.
Yeah. So my approach to coming back to collecting, I had to make some decisions. I mentioned earlier, like, oh, I got a classified figure, but pretty quickly, one, I noticed that like scale-wise, classified figures are a little bit smaller, definitely than Masterverse, but then also some of the other things I collect. Masterverse was actually going to be like in my brain, like this is going to be what is going to like anchor my collection. And that was a line where I was like, I'm going to try and get as many of this line as possible. But then, you know, I've got wandering eyes and I'm really interested in just other things. And like you, it's more about genre. So that's where it was like, okay, so this is what I'm going to do. Masters of the Universe has, what I've loved about it since the beginning is, yes, it's sword and sorcery, but it's also like sci-fi and, you know, it's rocket ships and robots and interplanetary travel, like all of that stuff mixed in with magic, sorcery. It's, you know, it's science fantasy from the tradition of Flash Gordon and John Carter from Mars, right? But like it's really a mix. So I've got some Conan stuff, some true like old school barbarians, to like some Lord of the Rings bits, odds and ends, to on the other end, like full on like cosmic legions and I don't know what else, some robots. I got some Transformers. So like, so it's like pretty wide, but in my brain, it kind of works as this like science fantasy inspired by MOTU, inspired by Jack Kirby kind of thing. Mythic Legions is another one of those lines that I'm pretty heavy into. By no means complete, but that is the lion's share of figures that I'm looking at over there now, along with Masterverse. Cosmic Legions I already mentioned. Super 7, man, like their ultimates I'm picking and choosing. So definitely got some Thundercats because that slots right in. I've got some of the worst figures. That's the name of the line, including some of the Robot Reaper, because it's like, yeah, robots, killer robots, let's go. Then I've got like Zezre's Combatants Fight for Glory, right? You got like
those are amazing. I love those.
You got Gladiators, some World of Warcraft stuff, man. So it's definitely all over the place. It's funny, like Masterverse kind of became was the foundation, and then everything kind of else grew around it. So there's some MOTU classics in there that I've gone back to buy, and yeah. Oh, and of course I got to say AWOC, Animal Warriors of the Kingdom. I can't believe I forgot it, but yeah, it's like perfect. Big furry beasts with armor and swords and laser guns. Perfect.
Yeah, I have plenty of other stuff that I could probably jump into, but I'm just trying to focus more on my MOTU right now. My Turtles and Thundercats. Yep. Like my next two, probably in that order, that I loved as a kid. I'm just like, man, room is a big thing for me. Like, just with all the Masterverse and Origins, everything, this whole back part of my wall is covered. So I'm kind of running short on space as it is.
But hey, we're having fun while we're here. And let's go ahead and close out today again. So this was the very first episode of Into the Masterverse, really just an introduction. Wanted you to kind of know who me and Cobb are, wanted you to remember how we're going to be bouncing back and forth between our channels. And if you forgot, don't forget, like there's that URL at the bottom to make sure that you're following as the episodes come out. That's where you'll be able to find it. It's down there, bit.ly/into the Masterverse. Just wanted to spend some time getting to know like our backgrounds with Masters of the Universe and our collecting habits to this day. Next episode, we're going to get into sort of our regular schedule and our regular rhythm, because from there on, it's just going to be each episode is going to be focused on one release. So if that's an action figure, we're going to focus on that one action figure, give you a sense of like the background of the character, what they did with the design. We'll take a look at them. We'll do some turnarounds, look at the bio, all of that kind of stuff. So that by the time we're done with this whole Into the Masterverse thing, we're hoping that you'll have a dope like retrospective on the entire line, figure by figure, release by release, as well as special episodes like this one where we give you a little bit more context. So that's it, man. I think we just finished recording episode 1 of Into the Masterverse. What are you looking forward to the most?
Just getting back into, like, I've kind of been filming some of the turnarounds and just pulling out figures that from like the earlier waves that I haven't really, they've just kind of sat on shelf, and just being able to play with them and look at them, like it's already bringing back some of those memories. Like, oh man, I remember when this came out, and then being able to look at what we have now, and I'm like, oh yeah, this is improved, this is different. Just being able to discuss with somebody else that's into it as much as I am, because I know, like you were saying, not a whole lot of people doesn't seem like into Masterverse as much as it. You said Origins or anything else, but yeah, connecting with you here and your love for it as well. It's cool to have somebody to actually communicate with it about.
And that's where I'm at too. But I think something else that I'm really looking forward to is next episode, especially like looking at the whole line and kind of revisiting that, because I want to talk a little bit about the reaction that people had when they heard that this line was coming out. And I want to kind of
too.
Yep.
The numbers on, because I don't think people realize how many are out there now. I mean, we're up to I think it's 84. Close. I mean, there's another wave that's not even out yet. Getting close to that 100 mark. I mean, 100 figures out, which is, I never thought I'd go that far.
Yep. So we're thinking we're going to shoot for roughly a new episode every 2 weeks. We're both super busy people, but we're going to try that as best we can. We'll give it a shot. All right, folks, but help us out. The way that the whole YouTube algorithm works, they like interaction. So in the comments of this video, let us know if you're into the Masterverse and to what extent, like, are you a completist? Are you only getting certain characters? Are you only getting certain sublines? also, just like we kind of gave our little bit of history about Masters of the Universe, we'd love to hear from you. Tell us what your background is with Masterverse and be a part of that conversation.
All right, so yeah, join us next time as we journey off into the Masterverse.
Woo!